Hey y'all, welcome to Parent Empowerment with Mandy Drogin. I'm Mandy. I'm just a mom sitting down having real conversations with real Texans about what's going on across our state. Today, I am excited to be joined by the Dean of the School of Civic Leadership at the University of Texas at Austin, Justin Dyer. Justin Dyer is here as a concerned father looking across the country at the landscape of the teachers, teacher trainings, and what's going on inside our classrooms. Dean Dyer. Justin, thank you for being here.
Thanks, Mandy. Glad to be here.
Well, you are doing an incredible job at the School of Civic Leadership. It is flourishing over there. You've got more and more kids that are coming. Tell our audience a little bit about what the School of Civic Leadership is and why you started it back in 2023.
We had this great opportunity. Our Board of Regents adopted a motion in 2023, and they asked us to create a new school that would educate students in the Western tradition and American constitutional history and prepare them for leadership in a free society. And so we've had the opportunity to translate that into a curriculum. We launched a civics honors major. We're soon going to launch a great books major and a strategy and statecraft major focused on military and diplomatic history. We have a classical education certificate that we hope to launch soon. And so we've been able to take that charge from the regents and put it into action and create real opportunities for students. We have a freshman cohort of majors this year. We've got another cohort of majors coming in next year. So we're really at a moment where we can scale and build from here. And it's a great moment to be doing this.
It's so exciting. I want to go back to when the regents made this decision. They are probably just like everyone else that's looking across the landscape and seeing that there is an erosion of Western values, American culture, the understanding of what made us great. So I commend all of them for saying we need to do something different. Can you explain why that this was needed? Why just having a Western Civ course isn't good enough? Or why that you actually had to create an entire new school to focus on this growing issue that we're seeing all across America of kids that don't know who we are and why we're amazing?
I think there were two different things going on. One is the drift away from the original purpose and mission of public higher education in the United States. And you see that everywhere. This is not a Texas story. This is a story across the country. But Texas is leading the way by bringing us back to that founding mission. You see it in the motto of the University of Texas: education is the guardian genius of democracy. And we translate that into Latin and put it in the motto, but it points to this idea that educating for citizenship is something that public universities ought to be doing. We're created by the state, we serve the state, we have a public purpose. In the document that laid out the vision for the University of Virginia, James Madison and Thomas Jefferson sat down in a tavern with a bunch of people and thought about what they were going to do with this new appropriation from the state legislature. They laid out the curriculum. It was focused on understanding Western civilization, America's founding principles, and preparing people for leadership in the society. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that they say in that document is that it will be from the students who come to this university that we draw the legislators, the judges, and the statesmen on whom the public happiness depends. So there was always this idea that in a republic where the people govern, you have to give them a kind of civic education, not only at the K-12 level, but also as part of higher education. So one, we've moved away from that in higher education. That's one problem. But not only did we move away from it, we replaced it with something far worse. And in too many places in American higher education, you get a kind of anti-civic education, mm-hmm. anti-Western civilization, and anti-American values. And so Texas decided we were going to do something about that, and we are starting to build this new school. And with some of the reform efforts going on right now, the goal is not just to have a new school doing this, but to have this be something that the whole campus is doing and affects everybody.
That's fantastic. And I'm excited about that. So one of the pieces of legislation that I think is going to help across the campuses where we're seeing a lot of the more radical ideas be pushed into the classrooms. We're constantly, I feel like it's every single week. In fact, just recently we had a new video come out from Accuracy and Media from UNT talking with a staffer that's saying, yes, DEI is still in our curriculum. We just changed the syllabus, changed the coursework. So we know it's there. We know all of this is there and it's kind of embedded. And I would say a lot of, unfortunately, faculty have been just seeped in that from their K through 12 and pursuit of higher education. So Something that you touched on really, really lightly that I want to get into and that I'm passionate about is education. And both of us are parents, and we choose a classical education for our children because it does exactly what you're saying. It really teaches understanding of the foundations of Western civilization, American civilization, our culture, our heritage, and why it's so important to understand where we came from and how we grew from. I mean, we're coming up on 250 years, a baby country, but to be really the leader of the free world. And that is super important. But what we know is occurring between the growth in classical education, I know that in charter schools, we did a report here that said that we've grown 7-fold in charter schools. It's the fastest growing sector, with the passage of education freedom accounts that are now going out to parents and will be utilized. We expect to see a growth in classical private schools. And then, of course, House Bill 1605 created the Bluebonnet classically inspired curriculum for our public schools. And so there's a lot of classical education that we're trying to do systemically in all forms of education. But the problem is there's not enough teachers. There's not enough teachers who have gone through schools of civic leadership that have a really strong understanding of classical literature, philosophy, economics, all of the different subject matters that really does build into the Western experience and who we are. So talk to us a little bit more about why you came up with this idea for a certificate in classical education, and where you expect for this to go, and who the students that are taking it will be.
Part of it is we think the kind of education that we're offering is important for everybody. And there are different ways that students can plug into that. We have classes that count for the core curriculum. Students can do a minor with us. Students could do a major with us. But we also want the students to connect to different vocational outcomes while they're at the university. It's important to figure out what they're going to do next. Yeah. And some of our students, teaching is a great opportunity for them, and it's a great vocation for them to think about and to take the knowledge that they get through our program and to put it into practice in some of these schools. And like you said, there's a great opportunity with school choice and with the charter school network that we have in Texas for students to go into teaching. And they could do that with our major and with the certificate to help them think about some of the big questions that they would need before getting into the classroom. Yeah. So we'll rely on experts in this field. We'll draw people into the classroom with our students. And it'll provide an opportunity for others at the university who want to get a certificate in classical education to think through that as a vocation, and I think a really noble one. I don't know what the numbers are, but I was at a conference on classical education, and somebody put the numbers in the tens of thousands of new teachers that we're going to need in the next several years because of the flourishing of this movement. And so we have to really think deeply about that labor supply challenge. It's a great challenge to have, but it's real and it's there.
It's real. Well, kudos. Thank you for doing this as a mom, and I know your kids as well, that we want to have great teachers that truly understand and believe in the content, believe in American exceptionalism and what we are where we came from, but what we're trying to protect for the future. Well, that is very, very exciting. So can you tell me, if a student goes into to UT as a whole, and they would like to pursue a history degree or a chemistry degree, are they able to also simultaneously pursue a certificate in classical education if they think, maybe I want to go teach chemistry, but I also want to know the culture of what I'm going into?
Yeah, pending approval, once this is launched, any student at the university could do that. I think it would be a great thing for them to pair with a history degree or a biology degree or whatever it might be, to think about classical education, its history, the way that you approach it, its philosophy, and then also pair that with some substantive classes.
Right. Do you expect to see, you mentioned, yes, there's going to be a shortage of tens of thousands of teachers that understand Western civilization truly enough to go into that classical education, to know the great books. Do you expect to see this grow across Texas?
Oh, I think so. I think that this is something that, if it's successful at UT, it will be successful at other places, and hopefully what starts at Texas changes
that's
the rest
right.
of Texas.
I think it does. I often say that as goes Texas, so will go America. Right, so as goes the University of Texas, so will go all universities. Yeah. I hope so. I hope not just here in Texas. Yeah. I was at a conference recently and talking about this. I actually said, we need to, the whole premise of my speech was we need to FedSoc, the colleges of education. And
Yep.
for those that don't know, in the legal schools back in the 80s were kind of being run by far leftists, and a group of great American patriots said we need to create something, which was the Federalist Society, to take back the training for the legal profession. And I really want to see this happen with the colleges of education. Sometimes I hear people say, let's just abolish them. And I don't think that's going to be happening. But I do think that there is a whole lot of improvement that can happen all across our country in our teacher training programs, so that we are sending in America's best and brightest into our classrooms to raise up the next generation of leaders and business leaders and producers, those that create and build things, as well as parents and voters. I mean, that's something that I think is really, really important for people to recognize, is that understanding of a constitutional republic and what the purpose of government is. So, but can you talk to us a little bit when we're talking about that minor in classical education? What will that, I know that y'all are in the process of going through approval. What will that look like? Roughly how many hours will that be? And what are some of the courses that students, whether they're in the School of Civic Leadership or they're coming from an outside department, what kind of classes would they be taking?
It'd be a 6-class certificate.
Okay.
So a student, as part of their curriculum, would take 6 classes. When you do a certificate at the university, those courses can also count toward a major. So if our students are doing a major in civics honors or great books or strategy and statecraft, some of those courses can also count for the certificate.
Okay.
The key, though, is 3 of those classes are going to be on classical education. It's history, it's philosophy, it's pedagogy. And so they're going to be thinking deeply about that and then combining it with their subject matter expertise. Be great for our students, it's great for a great book student, great for any student at the university. Classical education also includes, of course, teachers in math, teachers in science, teachers across the board, teachers in theater. And so if students can combine what they're really passionate about, what they love doing at the university with this certificate, it's not a requirement to go teach in classical education, but it's a way that will set them up, set them apart and get them thinking about that as a possible vocation for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And will there be a practicum component of this? So if you go through and you do want to enter into the classroom, will you have an opportunity to maybe go into, whether it's a public school that's utilizing the classically inspired Bluebonnet curriculum or a private or charter school that's classical?
Yeah, we need to build those relationships, but we'd love to have pathways for students to go do that kind of practicum in the classroom and sit and learn through experience, and then bring some of those expert teachers and heads of school into the classroom with our students on campus.
That'd be fantastic. I'm so excited about this, because I really do think, as you touched on, there's kind of this resurgence. I don't know if I think we're in the middle of kind of a cultural revolution, and people that love America and understand and know America and how the rest of the world has existed and why we are the shining city on the hill, that they're starting to push back a lot of the nonsense that we're seeing in particularly higher ed, but it's really permeated across the education spectrum. I know that we're in the middle of battling at the State Board of Education to rewrite the history and social studies TEKS, and it is pretty sad. It's sad to see the lens through which far too many experts, parents, teachers, and college professors that are engaged in this, the lens through which they view history or social studies. So I'm excited and I'm grateful to see what you guys are doing at the School of Civic Leadership. So where do you see the school growing into? What do you hope? I mean, it's fairly new. It clearly is growing, and you're getting more and more students every year. You're starting this certificate in classical education. You're growing and starting other avenues. Where do you want it to go? What do you expect to see?
Well, it's been such a good moment to do this, and we have info sessions for families once a month, and we'll do seminars for prospective students to come in, and those have been waitlisted for the last several months, and there's just an overwhelming demand and interest in what we're doing, and people excited about it. Where does it go from here? We're continuing to hire faculty. We have these 3 new majors that we'll have starting in 2027, so civics honors, great books, strategy and statecraft, classical education certificate. We have visions for other majors that we could potentially offer to students, and we want to create a PhD program. And so we've done the paperwork initially for that, but we'll propose that next year. And that gets to the labor supply problem in higher education, not just at the K-12 level, but thinking about, if this is going to be successful as a movement, not just at Texas, but across the country, where are the new faculty going to come from? And there are some great PhD programs still to go into for certain subject areas. But getting a PhD is not like going to med school or going to law school. It's not like the curriculum is fairly set. You pick a school, there's rankings, but you're going to get a similar education. You need a mentor. You have a very tailored program of study. You have somebody you want to work with. It's an apprenticeship model. Mm-hmm. And so if we have all these faculty who are bringing to Texas to build this school, we also want them to be able to mentor the future generation of faculty. And so that'll be an important piece of what we want to do as well.
That's huge.
I was thinking about this one note about education, what's gone on with education, mm-hmm. and how do we get back to something like a classical model. And at UT, as you know, you walk onto the main campus, and right in front of the main building in the tower, it says, "Ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." And that was 90 years ago when our Board of Regents adopted that as a motto for the university, or as an inscription for the main building. And William Battle, who we've grown to love as a classics professor and former president of the university, chaired that committee. And after they adopted that inscription, he said that the admonition to pursue truth as a means to freedom is as noble a call we can make on the youth. And I think that remains true today. And to the risk of oversimplifying things, I think what has happened is we have largely gone away from the idea that there is a truth to be known, to be discovered. And therefore, the purpose of education looks very different than that. Rather than pursuing truth as a means to freedom, it looks like you are viewing the world in terms of power dynamics. It's all a power struggle. There is no truth. It's all a word game, and the word game is to be able to deconstruct these relationships and to reorient the world in a different way. And so it really is, it sounds like you're exaggerating, but it's about deconstructing the institutions that we have, telling a different story about our past, reconfiguring things in a revolutionary kind of way for the future. No, that's not true everywhere on campus, but it's true some places on campus. And I think that's been a big part of what people are pushing back against. They want a classical education. They want the pursuit of truth, and they want an education for freedom. And that's what we want to provide for our students.
I love that. And you articulated that much more beautifully. I am constantly saying it's Marxism. It goes back, but it is. That's what it was. You know, Marx, his view, it was not, some people think it's just was an economics theory because he was pitting the bourgeois against the proletariat.
Mm-hmm.
But that is what we're seeing right now is, and James Lindsay explained it beautifully, I think, when he said that's the genius is Marxism, and then all the different species that spins off are CRT, critical race theory, which is exactly what you're talking about. It's the deconstruction and trying to pit someone versus someone else. It is that theory of the oppressed versus the oppressor. It's the same thing. It goes to gender theory. It goes to class theory. It goes to so many different aspects, and this breaking down of society that we have, which I saw I think it was in the 80s, the interview with a former KGB agent, Yuri Brezmenov, where he talks about the demoralization of society, and that was the only way that they knew they were going to break down Western society, because family, our faith was too strong, and that was that what knitted us together. And it's that breaking down, deconstruction, demoralizing, and it was occurring on the college campuses in the 60s. And I think that it has just grown and expanded, this idea that you can always be seeking, I'm sure you've heard this, my truth. Oh, your truth, his truth. There is truth. There is ultimate truth, and we would say ultimate truth. What is good? What is true, good, and beautiful? And that is the pursuit of what we all as human beings should be looking at, which is God, being more like God. And I think more and more people have tried to take religion out of every single conversation. They don't want to understand the founders and their view, and how. You mentioned Jefferson when they were in, I'm not sure which part you were talking about, but I believe when he was doing a either speech or was writing a letter on the state of Virginia or Virginia University, he said, science, liberty, and religion have an inseparable union. Without their joint influence, no society can be great, flourishing, and happy. And that to me is when I think about what universities have to look like, an understanding of Western civilization to perpetuate the freedoms that we have. he was spot on.
Yeah.
Those three components.
And Jefferson, was unorthodox in his religious views, and he was anti-clerical, but nonetheless, they wanted moral philosophy to be taught at the University of Virginia, and they included within moral philosophy natural theology and this idea that our liberties are the gift of God, which maybe is one thing that you're thinking about, comes from his notes on the state of Virginia. And he is thinking about those kinds of questions. What kind of education do you want to provide for the students at the University of Virginia? And Jefferson, even despite his own heterodox religious beliefs, he once described himself as a sect by himself. And if you're the only person in the world that holds those beliefs, then maybe there's something there. But he, nonetheless, in his first draft of the Declaration, says that it was a sacred and undeniable truth that we're all created equal, and that from our equal creation we have these unalienable rights. And the text that we now have in the Declaration came through edits of the committee, but that's Jefferson's own view. And so he's still putting that forward. And I think what we had is there's lots of nuance about how all these arguments unfolded over time, but at the bottom of them, I think in the most pernicious theories, it's a denial that there is a truth. And then it is a tool of analyzing the world where you just see all moral ideas, all patriotism, all religion as masks or cover for other interests.
Right.
And those interests could be reduced to all sorts of things. Marx reduced it to economic interests, but you could say, well, it's not just economics, it's whatever other identity category that you want to have. But at the foundation of that is the cynicism about the past, about the wisdom of the past, about the institutions that we have. And it's not that the past is perfect. It's not that there's not real oppression in the world. It's not that there's not discrimination. It's not that identity doesn't matter in all sorts of different contexts. But it's that there is a real truth, that the wisdom of the past is worth conserving, and that one of the things we want our students to think about is how do you conserve the best of the past and the best of our institutions, and how do you make them better for the future? And the fact that you can make them better means that they're open to criticism. But it's not cynical. It's not a cynical exercise. It's saying we love these things. They're ours. They're our inheritance, and we want to preserve them and make them better for our children.
Yeah. Beautifully said. So I want to get into the classrooms and the students and what you're saying. You said that you guys have a wait list. Mm-hmm. That's amazing.
Well, this is a wait list we also have a wait list for enrollment, but we have a wait list for info sessions, just high school students who want to come and find out about it. And we'll do seminars, so students can come and do a seminar with us and learn what it feels like to be in the school. And we'll cap that at 30 students, and we'll have a wait list now every month when we do those. And families come for the info sessions. People coming from all over the country. Yeah. People fly in for these, so it's been really interesting to see that
interest. That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's very exciting and encouraging. That makes my heart happy to know that there are a lot of great students out there that are interested in this. So I'm curious then, in the actual school, are you getting students that are coming in with that critical theory baseline from even high school, or maybe they're transferring in or whatever? Are you getting students that are pushing back against this, or mostly is it students that are wanting to go and pursue truth and truly study that the classics, study the history, study?
We had a unique experience this last year where we had this new school that nobody had ever been enrolled in, with a major that didn't exist yet. We had already proposed this major, but it wasn't approved yet. And so that first class of students, our current freshmen, they applied to UT as undeclared majors in a new school. And then we had 2 extra essays that everybody had to write as part of the process. Okay. And so by the time they went through that gauntlet, they were pretty well suited for the school. We had a lot of students who knew that they wanted to be a part of this. They chose this as the thing that they wanted to sign up for. And it's been great. And we've looked at the students themselves. We've done some surveys. We've tried to get a sense of where they are politically and otherwise. And it's a pretty pluralistic group. Yeah. They're not monolithically on any one side of the political spectrum. Mm-hmm. It has a disproportionate number of conservatives than you would find other places on campus. Sure. But it's a kind of healthy pluralism within this school. And the students are, I think, if anything, they're not cynical. And so they don't come with that kind of cynicism. Good. They want to learn. They're curious about what they're learning. And I think it's a bad thing if students come to the university with their mind made up about everything. Mm-hmm. They need to come, and they're there to learn. And if they're a freshman and they already know everything, there's not much we can do for them. And so we're inviting them into that conversation. But it's been a great experience this year.
That's fantastic. Well, I was asking that assuming that few kids that already know everything at 18 years old or whatever, that they would be pursuing an education in the School of Civic Leadership.
Now, on the other side, we welcome those students.
Sure.
And, they're at the university. We want to educate them too.
Right.
We want them to be in our classes. And so, our classes are open to everybody.
Of course.
But I think for the student who goes through and says, this is the major that I want to pursue, they're a self-selected group.
Got it. That makes perfect sense. So let's go back to, I'm curious, as a father, I want to hear, what are your favorite books for each kind of developmental level in school? So roughly the grammar school, rhetoric, and logic school. What do you think every kid in America should be exposed to? One or two books that you love, that you're reading to your kids, that you think is just really, really important as we are helping to develop young people to go and launch into college and into the world.
Yeah. I'm totally unqualified to answer this question.
No, you're a dad.
I'm a dad. We're reading something. I was a public school kid all the way through, and we had our kids in public school up until COVID, like a lot of other people in the country, and we thought, at first it would just happen that we just wanted them to be in school. We were in Columbia, Missouri at the time, and it became clear that 2 weeks to stop the spread meant they weren't going to be in school for 18 months. Mm-hmm. And so we panicked. We put them in a local private school that had a couple of spots available. It was a very small Christian school annexed to a church, and they did great. It was a great experience. They had real school with pencils and paper and all that. And then when we moved to Austin, we had our kids in a classical Christian school, and that's been a wonderful experience for them. But I'm learning as we go. As parents, we had to read Dorothy Sayers' essay called The Lost Tools of Learning, all about classical education and thinking about what classical education is. And my kids are a step ahead of me with what they're reading. They often are reading books that I did not read growing up, and I'm playing catch up trying to figure that out. The one author who's had a big impact on me is C.S. Lewis. And even when I was in high school, I read Mere Christianity for the first time. And in my public school, we had a very modest assignment, which was our English teacher had us go to the library, and she said, just pick any book and read it. That was all we had to do. And so I found Mere Christianity and read it, and it clicked and made sense for me for whatever reason. That first part is about the law of human nature, and that's structured a lot of what I do in higher ed. And so that's for my own kids. That's been, reading Lewis's books to them has been fun at different stages. And even this morning, my son who's in high school was, they were just reading as part of their education Till We Have Faces, which was Lewis's own favorite of his books that he authored.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm. And so it's kind of neat to see them go from
That's
Chronicles of Narnia to Abolition of Man when they're in the logic stage and thinking about argumentation, and then in rhetoric now reading Till We Have Faces. So it's been fun to see that progression.
That's very cool. So I love to take, when I have time, the Hillsdale online courses, because I was a public school kid. I did not get a classical education. I have fallen in love with it as I've been on a journey for not just as a parent, but really trying to figure out what do we need to do to course correct a pretty bad situation we have for far too many kids in public school and just education in general. And so fell in love with classical education and have done a lot of the online courses and did the C.S. Lewis course. And I don't think they told us that little tidbit about what his favorite book was, but that's great. He's one of my favorites as well. And it's fun to go back and see, or to see what kids are reading even in, second, third, in the early years, because I never read like the Little House on the Prairie series or any of these books that I feel like every child, especially little girls, I mean every child, but my daughters absolutely love them. So that I did not do when I was a kid.
I know. I feel like we need to go back have like a parent reading group.
It is.
We
it's
just
so
track
fun to read. Like I never read this, and I think that's, I don't know. Maybe it wasn't the 80s and 90s when they went off and stopped pushing reading enough and all of that. But this is one of the reasons why I love classical education, is going back to these great books that really can withstand.
When I was looking at the homework on the table this morning, and our 9th grader was doing a translation of Virgil's Aeneid in Latin, and I was like, he's so far ahead of me.
That's awesome.
I know. I got to catch up.
I know, it is. I didn't study Latin. My husband did, so he helps the girls with their Latin homework. But I do like to sing the songs with them. Yeah. They teach me Latin through Row, Row, Row Your Boat and a whole host of other songs. But it is something, looking back as an adult, that's one of the many reasons why I push it so heavily. I think that these kids, they just get so much rich knowledge knowledge that unfortunately too many of our public schools are not providing. I would say due to a crisis of low expectations, that soft bigotry of low expectations that these kids can't do it, and a whole host of other reasons. But this is something that I think more and more kids will be exposed to in their K through 12 journey, and then hopefully they will want to continue to learn in the culture and the heritage of Western civilization as they grow into voters and parents.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So as you're building the School of Civic Leadership, if someone is looking at it, what kind of courses are they going to be taking? And you talked about what you're hoping to do next. What are kids going to be taking? What do you think this ultimate goal for the school is?
So we had this really unique opportunity to sit down and think from scratch about what kind of education do we want to provide for our students. And we thought about civic leadership in the title as not a leadership education program like you might find in some parts of the university, but thinking about what kind of education do we want to provide our future leaders, which is a different kind of way of framing it. And we take as a given that the students who come through the university just will be leaders in their communities someday. We've got 40,000 valedictorians on campus, and most of the students graduate in the top 5% of their class. It is a campus full of students who will go out to be leaders like Jefferson and Madison we're thinking about in Virginia. The legislators, judges, and statesmen on whom the public happiness depends will be drawn from this body of students. And not only that, but the business leaders and the doctors and the professionals. And so what do we want to expose them to? Not every student will do a major with us, but hopefully some students will have the opportunity to take classes with us. Hopefully this kind of education becomes more prominent all across campus. But for the civics honors major that we launched, we have students who go through a set of tools classes. So they'll take microeconomics, constitutional principles, statistics class, and a class called Truth and Persuasion about how we know things and how we communicate. Then they'll do a set of intellectual foundations, which starts with perennial problems of civic thought, origins of America's institutions, democracy and capitalism, and excellence of character, a class about virtue ethics. So they'll do those. And then all their upper division courses are in Western Civ, constitutionalism, and civic leadership. And then they will do an internship. Everybody does an internship. Everybody writes a thesis. And we've thought a lot about for the students what they can pair that with. And so this is a great foundation for anything that they go in. And I don't think that we should sell ourselves short about the kinds of professional opportunities students could have in the private sector. I think a lot of people think of a program like this as a pre-law program, and we have a lot of students who are interested in law school. Some of the students may want to go into government service. That's wonderful. We hope some students do that. But we hope students also take this and go into private equity, build businesses, go into the corporate business world. And so thinking about what's the pathway for that. Any student can do a business foundations minor at the university. I think the internship program is very important. We have some students doing the pre-med track, and so they'll do this major, but they'll do the pre-med courses and plan to go to medical school. I think they'll be better off for having done that. One short story about that, I had a student before the School of Civic Leadership existed, but was a Plan 2 liberal arts honors major. And I advised his Plan 2 thesis. And he wrote a thesis on the relationship between virtue and knowledge in Greek philosophy and in early Christian thought, comparing those. And then he got an internship at the corporate headquarters of Dr. Pepper. And I thought, what a wonderful, what a wonderful combination. And he's at UT Law. He's going to do great. But had he pursued a career in corporate business, I think he would have been better off for having done a thesis like that. And I think the business world would have been better off for having someone like him as part of that organization. So we need to think about how we create those pathways for the students.
That sounds like a great thesis. I was just sitting here thinking, as you were talking, I want to read that thesis.
It was great,
So you mentioned something that I think a lot of times people don't think about when you're thinking about an education in civics, Western civilization. You do tend to think it goes more into the law, into the humanities path. But something that you touched on that is so important, especially right now, the Cato Institute released a report saying that 63% of Americans under the age of 40 have a favorable view of communism, which is horrifying. Yeah. And you mentioned economics. You mentioned that you're studying economics, that is a part of this, because our economic system, what built the West, was the freedom to pursue, to use your talents given by God to go and pursue whatever field, industry that would be beneficial to your community and your family and make an income. Yep. And so talk to us why that is so important and often lost in the great books and philosophy and all the other aspects of Western civilization, but how important it is
well,
to
we
this.
have a strong econ group that we've hired, and I think that's unique in the School of Civic Leadership compared to some of the other schools around the country that are doing similar things. And so we do combine that emphasis on great books and the great ideas of Western civilization with the really practical skill set of modern economics and just thinking about economic principles, how the economy works, how wealth is created. And we think that this is a really important thing for future civic leaders. What do we want them to learn? We want them to have some basic economic literacy about the rules and the principles of economics, both microeconomics and macroeconomics, so that they can understand that when they're in a position to influence policy in the future and to try to inoculate people against the seductive allure of these ideas that have been tried and have failed in the past. And they need to know the historical record of that.
That's right. The communism is one of those things that it's been tried so many times. It's not only failed, it's murderous. This is what happens, is people ultimately end up being murdered by authoritarian regimes everywhere that they've done it. And yet, every generation seems to think, we'll figure out the secret.
There's a certain logic to it that is just fundamentally opposed to liberty.
Correct.
And is incompatible with our institutions and what we have inherited. And the fact that whatever the percentage is of people who are saying, let's try that again, that's a problem.
It's a big problem.
Yeah.
Why? Yeah. Where are you getting this idea and why? And so I love that you all include the econ and stats and things so that your students can get a true full understanding and picture of the engine that built America. Yeah. Because it's not just the values and the principles and the ideals and the history and the philosophy. Yeah. It is also that economic system that has lifted more people out of poverty. Yeah. So,
and I had mentioned the civics honors major. We have two more that are coming online that I mentioned earlier, Great Books and Strategy and Statecraft. Great Books is for a student who is really interested in a deep dive on the great texts of the Western tradition.
Some examples. What are they going to be doing?
Well, you start with the ancient world. We think about Western civilization largely as a conversation between Athens and Jerusalem. Right. And so you start with ancient philosophy in Greece and how that's adopted by the Romans and Roman philosophers, the way that intersects with the biblical tradition and how that biblical tradition develops over time, both with respect to Judaism and then also with respect to the Christian tradition and that engagement with classical philosophy. And then they'll go through a set of courses that goes chronologically. So they begin in the ancient world. It's thematic. They go into medieval Europe to the Romantic Enlightenment periods and then to the modern period and think about these great texts and how they shaped our civilization. For a student who wants to do that, I think it's a great major to pair with something else. So if you're a student in business or a student in communications or liberal arts on campus, but you want to have an ability to do a great books major, I think this is a great thing. We're partnering with the Thomas Jefferson Center for Core Texts and Ideas to do this. And so they're friends over there, but are thinking about some of the great books. Military and diplomatic history will be the centerpiece of the strategy and statecraft degree. And so that's something we're doing in partnership with the Clement Center for National Security. But for a student who is really interested in diplomacy and intelligence, they will get a solid grounding in the military and diplomatic history, not only of the United States, but also of Europe and some of the other regions in the world, and then have a practical experience of doing a capstone project where they're doing an assessment of the United States strategy vis-a-vis other countries and thinking about U.S.'s place in the world. And all of that for us comes back to this idea of educating for freedom. And what does that look like? And we do it in two ways. One is a classical liberal education where the root word of liberal means free. It's an education appropriate to a free person. But also in the sense of a civic education, an education that allows people to govern themselves in a republic, that this experiment in self-government requires a certain kind of education. And so students who study Western civilization, the principles of the American founding, the American constitutional tradition, and how to defend America's interests abroad, will have an education for freedom in the fullest sense.
That's exciting. I would assume, I mean, you're an expert in your own right in so many fields and you're running the school. Do you get excited or attend any of the lectures of the subject matter experts that you're bringing in to educate the students?
Oh, all the time. Yeah. And they're so fun and interesting to listen to.
A lot of fun.
Yeah. And of course, just saw you at Alan Hertzke's lecture.
Yes, we did. So I'm curious, when you're taught, you kind of laid out different books and different avenues that kids can take. When you bring up that the great books, the influence, the philosophers and whatnot, and you mentioned, I would say the three cities, if you will, that have the most influence on Western civilization would be Athens, Rome, and Jerusalem. Yep. What do you think is the greatest book that has influenced Western civilization the most?
I think the Bible would be the kind of easy go-to answer. Yeah,
that would be my go-to.
I mean, genuinely the most influential book. And so if somebody wants to understand our civilization or our world, they really have to understand the Bible. And that's not from a devotional religious perspective, but just from an educated citizen perspective, understanding this story, which I think has changed the world in really fundamental ways and shapes the modern world in really fundamental ways. And so I think kind of hands down, I'd say the Bible. And then these other texts that are really important. There are lists that you can find from the American founders where Thomas Jefferson has a famous letter where he says that his goal in the Declaration of Independence was not to say anything new or novel, but to simply put forward the common sense of the subject as it was found in the elementary books of public right, such as, and then he says Aristotle, Cicero, Locke, and Sidney, etc. Yes. You're kind of left wondering what the etc. is. John Adams has a similar kind of list, but he includes a few different authors. But they all were thinking about that pairing of an ancient Greek, an ancient Roman, and two modern English philosophers, and then the Bible was influential for the founders. There are a couple of new books out about this. One, Carl Richard has a book called The Classics and the Founders, and there's another book called The Bible and the Founders out recently, and they show how the founders were steeped in the Bible, and that so many of the writings contain allusions to the Bible that we miss today. We don't even know that they're allusions to the Bible, but it's the common language that they have. And there's a famous in nerd circles, a famous article in the American Political Science Review about the political pamphlet debates leading up to the Revolution. And the most cited text in all of the political pamphlets, excluding political sermons, was the book of Deuteronomy, and it was cited more than all of John Locke's writings combined. And so it's part of the language. Yeah, that's
right. I wanted you to explain that. I'm talking about this constantly when I'm doing podcasts or educating parents to go testify at the State Board of Education or fighting back against the woke mob that shows up. There is, and I can see when I talk about Athens, Rome, and Jerusalem, people's heads explode because unfortunately, we have, I would say, either distorted or weaponized the First Amendment, freedom of religion, to go freedom from religion. And we have removed any references to historically and culturally relevant texts, including the Bible and or that mention the Bible. It's become like, you can't say this. And Western civilization was built on that revelation, Jerusalem, and reason that came out of Athens and Rome. And for some reason, I think in higher ed, but in K through 12, that's become something that you can't, it's like a no-go zone for some weird reason. And there's not enough leaders like yourself that are saying, you can't actually understand history, American history, Western Civ. You can't understand history of the world without understanding and knowing the Bible, even from just a historical context.
Right. Yeah, and we do have a new program that we're launching next year called the Ackerman Program on Jewish and Western civilization. And that is something that is already there. We think about Athens and Jerusalem, and the Jerusalem element is extremely important. But we're spotlighting that and really drawing it out, the ways in which Jewish and Hebraic ideas of course, influenced and shaped Western civilization, but also the American founding and America's founding principles, and thinking about America's strategic role in the world today. The state of modern Israel is extremely important. Yeah. And so we're drawing those things out. And for students, they'll be able to take classes, and they are able to take serious classes on the Bible. There's a class called The Bible and Its Interpreters that's been offered at UT through the Jefferson Center. There's a class next semester called The Five Books of Moses that will be offered. And then we have a visiting professor as part of this program who will teach. I'm excited about this. I think we should do it for the community too, separately from the.
I'm sitting here thinking, I want to take these courses.
Well, so this will be a semester of Genesis in the fall and a semester of Exodus in the spring. And it's going to be a serious, deep read with all of the interpretive debates and commentaries on those texts, drawing out their influence in Western civilization. And so I'm excited for that and excited for our students.
That sounds awesome. I think that it would be... these sound like great courses. You're making me want to go back to school because I missed all this. I'm not gonna lie. Yeah. It took going back over the past 15 years of my life and being like, what did I do when I was in school? Because I was not studying.
I mean, there's something real there that
texts.
When you're 18 to 22, it's not the ideal age for many of us to deeply study these texts, but people get, later in life, they're really, really interested. And I think the university, we need to do a better job of engaging that community because it's important for our state. It's important for our future. We need to bring people in. And so that's something we should do more of.
It is. And I think I would say that part of it, just looking across the education landscape, part of it is because it's effectively been removed from K through 12. And I commend Chairman Aaron Kinsey and so many leaders that are working on the new social studies and history structure. The structure and the curriculum, which is the first time in the country, it's a classically based chronological structure where we will be teaching our kids using primary sources, assuming that it passes. Heads are exploding right now because, people are not, they want to focus more on world cultures and all of this. I mean, they're trying to, these are my words, not yours. They're trying to DEI our history as opposed to saying what is most important and paramount that children need to understand about who we are and where we came from. But so that is great. But that's what, from me, just thinking about my education experience in a public school, and it wasn't talked about. This was not talked about. It wasn't made interesting. You had football coaches, no offense to the football coaches, but they were teaching history courses more so they could get out to the field and, train the team. And so I get it to some extent, but it really was just a back burner subject in your K through 12 experience. And then I don't know that it was connected in college to the importance, the significance, and how it really is a launch pad to whatever your dreams you're supposed to, go pursue your purpose in life. It wasn't made clear. And it sounds like the stuff that y'all are offering at the School of Civic Leadership, it really does showcase, here's where you can plug this in wherever you go in life.
Yeah.
Whether it's business or medicine or education or whatever your path is, this is just all really, really important knowledge. Mm-hmm. I also think when you hit a certain age in life, as you're seeking truth and you're realizing aging happens really quickly, you are seeking for that ultimate truth. And how do you pursue that? And this tells that. It gives you that baseline and understanding of the wisest people in the world have figured out throughout history.
Yeah, and I think you want students to have access to these texts, these ideas, to have people a little farther along on the journey, helping them, guiding them through it, with their minds open to the idea that there might be something here, that we might have something to learn from the past. And I think it's about your approach to the subject. You could read the same book in a totally different way, but if your goal is not to stand in judgment of the past, but to be open to learning from the past, then you're going to have a different experience. And you approach it as though there's a true wisdom tradition that we can take the best of and apply it to our own lives and extend it into the future.
That's beautifully said. I could not agree more. If you study it and look at it to learn from it as opposed in judgment, because I think right now, particularly with all of the critical theories that most college campuses are just seeped in, is that it's to judge. It's to constantly to judge and point out, well, he was a flawed person and he was flawed and he did this. we're all flawed. We're all sinners. We all do bad things. If you had a microscope on your life, what would it look like? But I think it's just very easy, and it's encouraged, unfortunately, in far too many classrooms across the spectrum is to look at it in judgment and critique as opposed to learn from
Lewis
it.
has this great essay called On the Reading of Old Books, and he talks about this. And one of the things that he says is that every age has its characteristic vices, including our own. Mm-hmm. And it's very easy for us to see some past ages' characteristic vices. Mm-hmm. But what we don't get, if we simply stand in judgment of those past works, we don't get their correction of our vices. And the idea would be that it goes both directions. And he says, so reading old books is like every once in a while letting the clean, cool sea breeze blow through our minds, and that we can gain something from the past. And so I think that's the approach that we want our students to have, that we sit in front of these texts as something that we can learn from, that there's something of value there.
That's beautiful. Okay, before we wrap up, I want you to look in that camera, and I want you to tell the parents, the high school students, and really just the patriots of Texas why it is so important that we educate the next generation of Texans to have a strong understanding of Western and American civilization and what we're fighting to protect as we move forward.
Well, education is a perennial need in a republic. To have self-government, we have to educate the next generation, and this is always true. And there's a famous line from Ronald Reagan in the 1960s, Governor Ronald Reagan, thinking about education. And he says that freedom is always only one generation away from extinction. And that remains true. And we have a role to play in higher education. There's a role for the K-12 system. There's a role for families and churches and community organizations. But to have a place like the School of Civic Leadership, we hope that we'll be part of that solution, that we can help educate for freedom for the next generation.
Dean Dyer, thank you for launching the School of Civic Leadership. Thank you for all that you're doing and growing to share the wisdom that you hold in all of those. Thank you for joining us today on Parent Empowerment with Mandy Drogin. And now you have the power.